Thank you so much, Balan.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to this conversation a lot. I've been reading a lot about what you've researched. I've been thinking about the problem that you've tackled scientifically, and I want to begin with this. I want to ask you. I think there's a quote from you where you said dreams are probably one of the greatest scientific mysteries.
Oh, yeah, I think so. That's
more?
definitely the case. And the reason is that, look, here you are in this world where you are, thrown into craziness. You might see yourself on the moon, wrestling with an alligator, wearing a suit, eating from a fridge. Everything is crazy. Everything is bizarre. Everything is strange. And just that world is just so intriguing. And then when you explore the science behind it, what's going on in the brain, how come the brain can produce these bizarre and otherworldly experiences, that's intriguing. So it's one of the big mysteries of science, really.
And we have no idea why that happens, huh?
We have some ideas.
Okay.
So we know roughly what's going on in the brain when we are dreaming. So let me take you to sleep first. So when we sleep, we go through different stages of sleep. So you have stage 1, your body temperature sort of falls, cardiovascular, respiration, everything drops, things become slower. Then you head to stage 3. During stage 3, you have sleep spindles, which are these spindles that goes like this. If you read on the recordings of neurons, they go like this, and there you have like a weird like tail on the end of brain waves. Mm-hmm. So the brain is really in this interesting state. Then you hit deep sleep, right? So during deep sleep, you have, and this is really interesting because you find that neurons in far-flung regions of the brain, so you have the overall brain, this is the cortex, the outer layer, have different portions. You have the prefrontal cortex, the occipital lobes back in the ear here, mm-hmm. where vision occurs. And then you have the sides of the brain, the emotional portions and so forth. During deep sleep, this stage of sleep, the fourth stage, you have far-flung regions of the brain where neurons fire in synchrony, which is really interesting, right? So you have these waves called, delta waves, big waves. Quite interesting. And the reason we have these waves, by the way, is that the brain is sort of working on incorporating memories and taking and weaving that memories and in the memory part of the brain, storing that. So that's a part of it that's occurred during deep sleep, right? During deep sleep, you also have things like all the sort of things we need for bodily respiration, like bodily repair, so to speak. So skin replenishment, hair, bones, again, cardiovascular health, all that during deep sleep, this stage of sleep, this fourth stage of sleep. Now, interestingly, we hit REM sleep after that, rapid eye movement sleep. So I said during deep sleep, the waves, when you eavesdrop on neurons in deep sleep, the synchronized big waves, right? Mm-hmm. During REM, what you have is these fast waves like this. So neurons go really erratic pattern, right? And if you eavesdrop on a person and looks inside his brain while he's in REM sleep, and you compare that to a guy who's awake, the brain looks the same. So here you have a guy in REM sleep, sleeping away, and you compare that with a guy who's awake, and their brain looks indistinguishable. They look the same. Same patterns called beta activity. Beta activities, these fast waves, right? Okay, so far so good. Then, during this REM stage of sleep, what occurs is that your body paralyzes you. So you're paralyzed from head to toe during REM sleep. Okay, so in the brain stem, the lower part of the brain, you have structures called the pons and the medulla, and these structures send commands down the spinal cord to paralyze you during this stage. So you're completely paralyzed from head to toe. So you have these chemicals called glycine and GABA, inhibitory neurotransmitters. So in the brain, you generally have two types of neurotransmitters. You have what's called excitatory and inhibitory. Inhibitory, that's glycine, that's GABA, and things like that. Excitatory, dopamine, and so forth. These are acetylcholine and so on. These they put the brain on fire. They fuel things up in the brain, make things excited. Right? So you have that. All right, so far so good. Now, why are you paralyzed, you might ask me, right? So why does the brain paralyze us during REM sleep? Well, during REM sleep, you have vivid and lifelike and crisp dreams. And these are the dreams where you see yourself on the moon, as I said, having a drink with Messi and playing soccer with the, everything is bizarre, strange, everything is warped. The landscape is all, all over the place, right? So your brain is clever. It says, look, I don't want Balan to act out his dream and hurt himself and his sleeping partner, so I'm going to paralyze him during this stage of sleep. And that's why your brain has this mechanism where it paralyzes you. So this is during REM sleep. Now, during REM sleep, there's an interesting shift in the neurochemistry of the brain, and the various parts of the brain that are active, changes in the state. So, for example, on the sides of the brain here, you have the prefrontal cortex. Specifically, this part is called the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. This part of the brain is involved in sort of utilitarian thinking, cold cognition, things like being calculated, thinking logically, thinking in a serial manner. All of that occurs in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. A mouthful, I know. We call it DLPFC. We have on both sides this, the structure. On the mid portion, on the other hand, you have what's called the medial prefrontal. The medial prefrontal it's involved in sort of emotional decision making, cognition that's sort of tainted with emotion, like
anger.
Not anger to some extent, but more like you are angry at a person, but you're trying to assess whether you should be angry.
Got it.
Like it's kind of those emotions that you feel, but you have them and you're trying to decide. It's kind of the bridge between emotion and intellect. A lot of self-referential thinking about, who is Baland, or who is Joe, who is Michael, what he's about. So things like empathy, and even things like theory of mind. What is Joe thinking right now? What is his agenda? So emotion, perspective taking, all that, it occurs here in this part of the brain.
So more subjective.
More subjective, but you can say it's kind of the bridge between,
pure subjectivity and pure objectivity.
You can say so.
Yeah,
Emotion and intellect.
Right.
Right. That's part of the brain.
Okay.
Now, interestingly, during dreams, this part of the brain, the DLPFC, the calculated, that part of the brain turns off. It shuts down. And that's why the dreamer doesn't know he's dreaming. So he loses self-agency, for example. He kind of, his agency, awareness of him being dreaming goes away. Logic is warped. So as I said, the landscape is all bizarre and strange. Things are not cohesive and serial in that manner. Things are just all over. And that's because these sides of the brains are, shut down effectively, right? So you have that. Now, this part of the brain, the medial prefrontal, is still active to some extent, and that's why you still know it's you. Like Baland know it's Baland in the dream, and I have feelings like guilt and jealousy and things like that. These feelings of guilt and jealousy and embarrassment, these are emotions that require self-referential thinking, knowing that I am Baland. There's a knowing that's really mediated in that part of the brain. So that part of the brain is active, the medial prefrontal. And let me know, by the way, if I'm becoming too technical on you.
No, you're fine.
Sometimes I have that tendency,
Yeah, no, you're fine.
Okay, good. So you have that. Beside that, you have things like the TPJ, which is up here in the parietal lobe. So on each side, we have centers that's sort of a multimedia studio in the brain. It's up here. It's involved in taking information from various sensory modalities in the brain, like vision, touch, hearing, and then weaving together a sense of self. So I, Baland, create a feeling of a sense of a self. I know I'm here. Now, this feeling comes about in the brain, in the TPJ, that center of the brain. It's involved in creating that sense of a body image and having a sense of self.
Right, having boundary conditions to the self.
Having boundary conditions. So things like when, for example, if there's a stroke to that part of the brain, right? So what happens typically is that you have paralysis in the left side of the brain, right? So, and left side of the body, excuse me,
right.
yeah. So the right side of the brain controls the left side of the body and vice versa.
Right.
So you have that. Interestingly, if there's damage to the right hemisphere, and specifically that those body image regions, if you have paralysis in the arm, not only do you have the paralysis, but if the TPJ is affected, you might say, this arm doesn't belong to me, it belongs to you. Okay, so
a sense of self with the arm is lost.
Sense of self is lost. Or you might say, this arm belongs to my sister in Italy. And mind you, this person is completely sane and normal in other respects. So they sit down with you, play chess with you. But because the stroke not only affected the motor area, so the arm became paralyzed, it also affected the TPJ area, so their sense of self got distorted. Their sense of
Do
self.
they have ghost arms and that kind of thing where they feel like this is moving on its own and it's not really under my conscious control? That happens with that?
That's interesting. That's called alien hand syndrome.
Right.
So if you have damage to another part of the brain called the ACC, anterior cingulate cortex, a fascinating structure. It's just beneath the medial prefrontal cortex, as I mentioned before. Just beneath it, there's this ACC region. And the ACC is involved in empathy. It's involved in, things like, various forms of things, So, for example, if you stimulate that part of the brain, the ACC, what happens? The person will start to feel like there's another person in the room with him. There's that part of that aspect to it as well. But if you have a stroke to the ACC, for example, you might experience what's called alien hand syndrome, where your hand will start doing various functions on its own. So it might, if one arm sort of buttons down the shirt, the other might, take it up, or it might do things without your conscious control.
Right.
So that's the ACC.
Right.
But it's interesting. It's really the TPJ that's involved in a body image construction. And that part of the brain, and the whole sort of what I'm trying to get into here, is that part of the brain also shuts down during dreams. And that's why you find yourself in these bizarre landscape where the sense of self becomes fluid. Like you feel like you might occupy, somebody else's body, or you might occupy a famous person's body, like you might be Barack Obama or something, right? Or you might be a bird. So the sense of self it deteriorates. And so you might,
I might be flying.
Or might be flying.
Right.
Well, actually the flying aspect is different, is a different circuitry. So let's go into that. So the TPJ shuts down, so the sense of self becomes fluid. But then you say, well, sometimes you fly in dreams. What's that about? It turns out in our ears, there is what's called the vestibular system. It's just behind here, semicircular canals behind the ears. It's called the vestibular sense system. It's involved in things like balance. And when I'm walking, when I move my head like this, I have a sense of a balance of the world. Those neurons in the vestibular apparatus, the system becomes hyperactivated. They dance with activity. And so for that reason, the sense of self, you might be on Earth, but then suddenly you're in a spaceship and things are flying and things are, strange and strange in the sense that
Gravity is different.
Gravity is different. Inception, right? Kind of like that. Excuse me. That's because of the
vestibular neurons.
Vestibular neurons. You got it.
Got it.
So there's some systems overactive or just shutting down, like the TPJ shutting down, the prefrontal shutting down, the vestibular's hyperactivated. The emotional part of the brain, the limbic structure. So so behind your ears, you have a center called the limbic structure. It's like a ring, a limbic ring. It has things like memory centers, but it's involved in emotion and emotionality. Some people might say it's involved in creating conscious experience as well. It's a very interesting part of the brain. The limbic structure, maybe the most crucial part of the brain. In the limbic part of the brain, you have overactivity during dreams, during REM sleep. About 30% more active. So that explains why, dreams are so hyper emotional, hyper instinctual. You are, when you fear heavily. Or when you feel, emotions like joy, it's exasperating. It's extreme joy, right?
No joy in real life compares to a joy that you might, or terror for that matter.
The terror for that matter,
Right.
yeah, absolutely.
It's more. I say it's more real than real itself.
It's more real than real itself.
Right.
And another part of this is very interesting. So in a structure of the brain, and I hate throwing brain structures at people, saying, "Oh, this brain structure and this brain structure," but there's a part of the brain called the inferior parietal lobule. It's involved in creating images of the world. That part of the brain is also important for dreams. You have a stroke there, you cannot no longer dream. And you have a circuit that's called the mesolimbic brain circuit. So from this limbic center, there's a circuit going to the frontal lobes that's involved in that creates dopamine and secretes dopamine. If you have a stroke to that part of the brain, again, you cannot dream. So that shows you dopamine and dopamine circuits are crucial to dreams. So having bliss, sense of reward, sense of emotion, all part of the neurochemistry and the dream experience. So those are some of the regions that are hyperactive.